Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is March 20th, 2017. The show is being broadcast, is being recorded on March 19th. And we've got a lot to talk about, a lot of things that are heating up right now. The deep state, Syria, some domestic issues as well. I don't even really know where to start. We've got we can finish up the discussion that we were in last week regarding the WikiLeaks Vault 7 releases and the revelations of intensive and extensive U.S. government CIA spying capabilities and actual spying. We can go over that if we have time, maybe. We've also got some research here that I'd like to present at some point regarding the American corporate mainstream media being merged with the CIA since the 1950s, and we can go into that if we have time also. But we have we've seen the geopolitical situation heating up, both in terms of Egypt, in terms of Libya, in terms of Syria, in terms of Iraq, and we've seen a mobilization of troops by the United States inside Syria. We've seen Israeli aggression, we've seen Syrian self-defense, and now we're talking about a mosque being bombed. That we can get into that as well. All of this stuff is really heating up right now, and I think we should really just jump into it. In terms of the geopolitical situation first, and then we could move on to perhaps the domestic situation regarding the spying and regarding the mainstream media involvement, because I think we should really focus on what's happening right now overseas, because this is of paramount importance. Let's start with Libya and go to Libya and Egypt. But you know what? First, let me plug the websites: BrandonTurbeville.com, of course, ActivistPost.com, NaturalBlaze.com, EraOfWisdom.org. All of that. You can find my work there. Again, BrandonTurbeville.com is the website where I repost all of my work, all of the YouTube videos, interviews, links to my books. All of that's there. All of the articles, you can follow them at BrandonTurbeville.com. And of course, the show Truth on the Tracks every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, UCY.TV. Now let's look at the Libyan situation here. We had emerging reports from Western mainstream media outlets, and again, you have to take these sort of at face value. Now, given the state of the media, it's the same as it always was, but the mainstream corporate fake news is really kicking it up a notch, and reporting not so much disinformation or misinformation, but is absolutely fantastic flights from reality here, and promoting stories that aren't even based in the reality-based world. So these reports are suggesting that Russia has deployed special forces troops to western Egypt in support of one of the Libyan factions that's vying for control of the country, and that faction is the faction of Caliph Haftar. We had these initial reports coming out on March 14th. They come from Reuters, and they were citing diplomatic sources who remained nameless from both the U.S. and Egypt. This Haftar was dealt a blow by an attack on March 3rd by the Benghazi defense brigades on oil ports that his forces controlled. I think, obviously, that's one of the important parts to this, is that it was oil ports. We have, speaking on conditions of anonymity, the U.S. officials saying that the United States has observed what they believe to be Russian special forces and drones about 60 miles away from the Libyan side of the Egypt-Libya border. This would be at Sidi Barrani. Reuters also reported that its Egyptian sources provided more detail. According to these Egyptian sources, according to Reuters, 22-member Russian Special Forces unit had been deployed, but the sources didn't discuss the mission of the unit. They said that the Russia had also used a base farther east in Marsa Matruh in February. And we had an Egyptian army spokesman, right? We have the denials, right? The Egyptian army spokesman Tamer al-Rifai, he denies any Russian unit was on Egyptian soil, period. He says there's no foreign soldier from any foreign country on Egyptian soil. This is a matter of sovereignty. The United States military declined to comment. The Russian Defense Ministry strongly denied the allegations, said the spokesman for the agency, Igor Koroshenkov, says that certain Western mass media have been stirring up the public for years with such false information from anonymous sources. We have Andrei Kosov, first deputy head of the Defense Committee in the lower house of the Russian parliament, called the accusations fake news. We have a report from The Guardian now. It says the Libyan president of the House of Representatives, this is Aguila Saleh Issa, told the RIA Novosti website that the Russians were assisting Hifter in other ways. He says, we asked the Russian government to help us with training the soldiers in our armed forces and the repair of military equipment by Russian specialists because the majority of our officers studied in Russia and many speak the Russian language and know how to use Russian equipment. They promised to help us in the fight against terrorism. Now, these reports, it could be real. Russia has met with Hifter before. It showed interest in aiding the Hifter faction. It's also shown signs of interest in disrupting the plans of the Western powers in Libya, the imperialist plans there. We also have, remember, the question of oil and geopolitical positioning and, of course, influence all play a role in any Russian decision that's become involved in North Africa. The information reported by Reuters is yet to be independently verified at this point, right? And we know that corporate press here tends to peddle the official State Department and deep state narratives for political and geopolitical purposes. So it might be fake news indeed, typical of Western media outlets, just trying to gin up more hysteria and fear over Russia's expansionism and spread of empire across the globe and all that kind of stuff that's, erroneously claimed by Russophobes and warmongers in the mainstream media and the pro-war left. So only time will tell on that. I'm not going to dismiss it. We're entering in to a period where it's actually hard to tell what's happening. Now, Egypt. We've seen clashes between the Sinai militants and Egyptian security slowly increase since the ouster of Muslim Brotherhood member Morsi from his position as president of Egypt. And ISIS activity in the peninsula has greatly increased as well. We've seen Egyptian security being faced with an increase in activity for some time from the Sinai militants. But the introduction of ISIS, and I mean ISIS proper, has also caused the situation to worsen. Up until now, though, the situation seemed more sporadic, even if it was increasing in frequency. Photos emerged from the Sinai region that suggest that ISIS' foothold in Egypt might be greater than many people, including the Egyptian security forces, had suspected. If the photos are actually depicting what they allege, and they appear to be, that ISIS has become so powerful in the Sinai that the port city of Al-Arish is now subjected to ISIS checkpoints. Al-Arish is the capital of the northern Sinai and its largest city on the peninsula. And these pictures, which you can see at my website, show ISIS fighters complete with rifles and RPGs walking through traffic and inspecting drivers' IDs. And one picture even shows a man being detained by the fighters in the city square. These photos were released by Amaq agency. This is the official ISIS news outlet, which it's never hacked or shut down, right? The greatest technological power in the world, despite claiming that it's fighting ISIS, can't seem to hack this terrorist news agency that's run by a bunch of Luddite, bearded freaks constantly on the run from the CIA. Well, regardless, all right, there's a possibility that the photos were staged, that they're just being used to instill fear in the Egyptian population, that it's propaganda coming from ISIS, but there still hasn't been any independent confirmation of the photos, but we do know in a recent video that ISIS called on fighters to slaughter Egypt's Orthodox Coptic Christians. But you can see the photos at my website if you want to take a look at that. The world is slowly descending into chaos in all four corners. And no, that was not a reference to a flat earth. That was just a phrase. Before anybody gets any thoughts there. Now, let's talk about the U.S. troop mobilization. This is where we really get into some dangerous territory. On March 2nd, U.S. troops were spotted moving in a convoy toward the Syrian city Manbij in North Syria. This new mobilization caught many Syrian researchers by surprise, particularly because of the Trump factor. This would not have been as surprising had it occurred under Obama, but we still have illusions. Many of us, not me, but many of us have illusions about the Trump administration. And this is why there was some surprise, but it also caused just utter befuddlement on the part of the average mainstream viewer. So the question would be, why would the U.S., who's already invaded Syria, make another push inside Syria in such a limited way, and why Manbij? So the confused response of the minority who actually know that there is even a conflict in Syria here in the U.S., such state as we are, the mobilization and deployment came as the Turk Euphrates Shield troops exchanged fire with Kurdish forces in west of Manbij, and those Kurdish forces are the Manbij Military Council. We had the spokesman for the Combined Joint Task Force for Operation Inherent Resolve, Colonel John Dorian, saying that the deployment was a deliberate action taken in order to make sure that the forces of the U.S.-led coalition were able to deter aggression and keep the focus on defeating ISIS elsewhere in Syria. Dorian's statements were a response to a Kurdish news agency, Rudlaw's tweet, announcing the sight of the American troops with the photographs. The U.S. military officials said that the deployment doesn't necessarily mean that there has been an increase in the number of American soldiers deployed to Syria as a whole, only that these specific soldiers were mobilized. However, over the last few days, it has appeared that the soldiers who were deployed, or who were mobilized to Manbij, were indeed new contingencies, that there's around 1,000 soldiers who were sent in there. The deployment took place shortly after Turkey's Erdogan reiterated his demands nationally that the Kurdish YPG leave Manbij and retreat to the east of the Euphrates. Erdogan warned the YPG that if they didn't do that, they might be removed by force. And as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, Kurdish and Turkish forces were trading fire as the deployment took place. So it appears that the U.S. is trying to deconflict the situation between the Kurds and the Turks, who are both U.S. allies but who are mortal enemies to each other. Now, we gotta mention the American deployment took place on the same day that the Manbij Military Council reached a deal with Russia to hand over 20 villages between Al-Bab and Manbij to the Syrian military. So, just to draw the proper attention to what I just said here, I'll state it again in different words. The Kurdish forces, in a deal brokered by Russia, agreed to hand over 20 villages that they control to the Syrian military. So it's cooperation and knowing their place, essentially. They are turning over the control of those villages to the Syrian military, and those villages are located between Al-Bab and Manbij. So The Syrian military would have effectively served as the peacekeeping force and a buffer zone between the Turkish forces and Kurdish fighters that had a tense relationship, to say the least, with the Syrian government. If the Syrian military had managed to do that, and I'm still trying to get word as to how many of these villages were actually handed over, if any were handed over, if it actually physically took place. But the United States deployed troops to this very location, right? It's obviously a bid to prevent the Syrian military from gaining this territory in the north of the country, and that if the Syrian military had gained the territory in that area, that would have endangered the buffer zone of Turkey and the ISIS protectorate that was set up by Turkey. It's also likely that the United States is attempting to act as a stand-in for Turkey, so the Turks are placated over the concerns of a Syrian Kurdish state on their borders. The U.S. policy towards Syria does not appear to have changed with the change of presidential power. The U.S. and Turkey have long been discussing a plan for a joint military operation to invade Manbij and Raqqa under the guise of fighting terrorists. Both countries have been supporting those terrorists and facilitating them since day one. The U.S., whether it's attempted to prevent the Syrian military from gaining new territory or whether it's merely attempting to deconflict between the Turks and the Kurds, the fact is that the war on the Assad government and the Syrian military remains. Neither option is one that's going to benefit the Syrian government in its war against the terrorists. It's only a question of U.S.-Turk military positioning and strategic alignment from which to launch a war of destabilization and destruction against the people of Syria and the Syrian government, who's been unwilling to knuckle under to the West. So the U.S. deployment is going to temporarily halt the major conflict between the Turks and the Kurds. Again, both allies of the U.S., but it's also going to prevent the Syrian military from regaining ground in the northern part of the country. The U.S.-led coalition stated that it was aware of the location of the Syrian military. We have Pentagon spokesman Captain Jeff Davis saying, quote, "They are certainly aware of where we are, and we are aware of where they are. There is no intention between the two of there being any conflict against any party other than ISIS." While Turkey clearly has no problem with allowing jihadist extremists on its border and funneling them into Syria, it is concerned about the Kurdish canton, especially the one that shows the promise of uniting with Kurds in Turkey. So Turkey's buffer zone proposal, which was at first a plan to solidify ISIS supply lines, has now extended to Manbij and Raqqa, much further south and east than they had originally announced. Turkey has actually stated publicly that it is not opposed to the Syrian military taking control of Manbij. That even comes from Turkish Prime Minister Binali Yildirim. He's quoted by Sputnik as saying, "We do not consider the scenario under which the Syrian army would enter Manbij as a negative one. The Kurdish self-defense units are leaving the city. The Syrian land must belong to Syrians." Well, now that's quite an ironic, out-of-character statement by Turkish officials, since they have done nothing but encourage Syrian land be given to non-Syrians. The jury is still out on whether this public position is as a result of Russia's increased cooperation with Turkey and then the possibility that Russia has convinced Turkey of a more reasonable position towards Syria, or whether it's simply more of Erdogan's treachery. In other words, a public position that's different from a private position. And Turkish soldiers in Manbij and Raqqa is by no means Syrian land belonging to Syrians. Regardless, the question of to whom Syrian land belongs is not a determination that should be left up to the Turks or the Americans, right? Neither of these countries have the right to deploy troops to Syria. Neither should have a say in the domestic makeup of the country. Turkey and the United States are foreign invaders. They're plain and simple. And the terrorists they allege to be fighting are nothing but the foot soldiers in their war against a sovereign nation. And I think we can sum this up pretty well with the words of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad when he gave an interview to Chinese media recently. This is the quote. This is You can't argue with anything he says here. He says, any foreign troops coming to Syria without our invitation or consultation or permission, they are invaders, whether they are American, Turkish, or any other one. And we don't think this is going to help. What are they going to do? To fight ISIS? The Americans lost nearly every war. They lost in Iraq. They had to withdraw at the end. Even in Somalia, let alone Vietnam in the past, and Afghanistan, your neighboring country, they didn't succeed anywhere they sent troops. They only create a mess. They are very good in creating problems and destroying, but they are very bad in finding solutions. So I can't argue with that at all. Now, what happened? I guess I should do the proper build-up to the Israeli question, because there's did an interesting story on March 16th regarding the Naftali Bennett and some of his statements, as well as the statements by recently elected Lebanese President Michael Aoun, who visited Cairo back in February. And when he did that, he made a statement which is seemingly innocuous, but is something in Lebanese politics and Middle East politics that's always been kept as sort of an open secret, and that is that Hezbollah is indeed a major part of the defense of the country. Now, we all know Hezbollah is a major part of the defense of the country, and that it's a very powerful force there. Other Lebanese presidents have always tended to skirt the issue. They've always tended to gloss over the fact that Hezbollah has as much power and influence as it does, and it's as important to Lebanon as it is. But Aoun essentially acknowledged the close relationship between Lebanon and Hezbollah, the state and the militia. And this is what he said. I'll give you his statement. As long as Israel occupies land and covets the natural resources of Lebanon, and as long as the Lebanese militia lacks the power, the Lebanese military lacks the power to stand up to Israel, Hezbollah's arms are essential in that they complement the actions of the army and do not contradict them. They are a major part of Lebanon's defense. Aoun's statements, they're realistic, they're reasonable, and it's there for all to see. But we have the opportunists in Israel, the warmongers, the vampires. They have, as is typical of them, leapt upon the statements to just squeeze whatever justification for war and slaughter they can possibly manage by claiming that Aoun is essentially stating that Hezbollah and the Lebanese military are one and the same. And for that reason, they are trying to claim that the Lebanese state is now essentially on the hook for anything that Hezbollah does. We have the Brigadier General Asaf Orion of the Institute for National Security Studies saying that Lebanon now puts itself on the hook for anything Hezbollah might do. Orion's claim was that Aoun's comments were, quote, a lifting of the official veil and tearing off of the mask of the well-known Lebanese reality, which widely accepted Western diplomacy tends to blur. The Lebanese president abolishes the forced distinction between the ostensibly sovereign state and Hezbollah. Thus, the Lebanese president takes official responsibility for any actions by Hezbollah, including Israel, end quote. That's not true at all, and of course, we give him credit for great prose and for being clever enough to seize upon these statements, but it's unfortunately just not true. We'll leave that be and perhaps come back to it if we have more time. I will continue with the story, though. We have official members of the Israeli government also smelling blood, ravenously attempting to pre-justify war crimes in front of the world. This is sort of what Israel does, right? It goes out and says, if you do this, and it's generally something that's innocuous, benign, regular behavior, if you do this, then we will commit war crimes. We'll kill civilians, we'll kill babies, we'll do these horrible things, and the blood of those innocent people will be on your hands. And it's a clever propaganda campaign, public relations campaign, because then the unfortunate Christian conservatives in the United States will hear these reports and then respond. Well, Israel warned them. They warned them over and over. If they did that, they would have to respond. And of course, nothing spells the love of Jesus Christ like murdering civilians for more territory, right? I believe that says somewhere in the Sermon on the Mount it was told to kill babies and Palestinians because of communists from Eastern Europe and their desire to have a little Ulster in the Middle East. But of course, that's sarcasm for those of you who are sarcasm deficient. The official members of the Israeli government, okay, who are they? They are Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, saying that the Lebanese army is a subsidiary unit of Hezbollah. He said that at the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. Well, that's not true. They're not a subsidiary unit of Hezbollah. I would say that they're more separate than that. Israel is largely the reason Hezbollah has retained its arms and military training to begin with. It's due to the fact that they always have to be on guard for the Israeli attacks and the invasions and occupations of Lebanese territory. This is the one, though. Security Cabinet member Naftali Bennett. This guy is a freak. He's a fanatic. He is a bloodthirsty Nazi, and I mean that. And it's if you see any irony in that, good. He's a war hawk. He's encouraged the continuation of land stealing and forced eviction and settlement building. He's frothing at the mouth with any opportunity to pre-play the victim in an armed conflict that Israel's been hoping to start for some time. Naftali Bennett is so much of a murdering piece of garbage that a lot of the Israeli Zionists were calling on this guy to calm down, because he was going to give Israeli Zionism a bad name. Right, even amongst the Christian conservatives of the West, even amongst the politicians who are paid to be servile to Israel, Naftali Bennett was really going overboard. Not that they don't all believe this, but it's that he was so open with it. Again, Israel, virtually the only country in the world who can just openly express the desire to kill and target civilians without the slightest repercussions. He's done just that, and he suggested that fighting Hezbollah was going to require too much effort on the part of the Israeli military because of the hard work to search and destroy missiles, which are not only deployed in the countryside but also in urban areas. He says, referring to his time in the military, Israeli military, he says, when we worked in a particular area, we did reduce the teams of rocket launchers there, but they simply moved a little farther north. They moved their launchers from the nature reserves, outposts, and open areas to dense urban areas. You can't fight rockets with tweezers. If you can't reach the house where the launcher is, you're not effective, and the number of houses you have to get through is enormous. After I was released from reserve duty, I read all of the books you wrote about the war. I understood in retrospect that the fundamental effect of war took place on its first day. In a phone call between former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and Condoleezza Rice. All right, so then he says that because the Israeli hesitation to hit civilian targets, which was at the request of George W. Bush in 2006 war with Lebanon, Israel couldn't win the war because they couldn't kill innocent people. He says that Lebanon presents itself to the world as a country that wants peace and quiet. Today, Hezbollah is embedded in sovereign Lebanon. It is part of the government and, according to the president, also part of its security forces. The organization has lost its ability to disguise itself as a rogue group. So what is he suggesting? This is what he says. The Lebanese institutions, its infrastructure, airport, power stations, traffic junctions, Lebanese army bases, they should all be legitimate targets if a war breaks out. That's what we should already be saying to them and the world now. If Hezbollah fires missiles at the Israeli home front, this will mean sending Lebanon back to the Middle Ages. Life in Lebanon today is not bad. certainly compared to what's going on in Syria. Lebanon's civilians, including the Shiite population, will understand that this is what lies in store for them if Hezbollah is entangling them for its own reasons, or even at the behest of Iran. If we declare and market this message aggressively enough now, we might be able to prevent the next war. After all, we have no intention of attacking Lebanon. Okay, well, that's not true. But they've attacked Lebanon twice, I think, in the last 20 years. We have Haaretz reporting Bennett as saying that if the war were to break out anyway, despite Israel's threats, Israel should engage in a massive attack on civilian infrastructure as well as traditional military operations in order to end the war quickly. And this, of course, is going to ring true with armchair warmongers in the United States who sit on their couch getting fatter as they watch television and love the idea of overwhelming force and targeting civilians because that's showing toughness. That makes them tougher, I guess. It makes their genitalia bigger than someone else's because they can sit on a couch and feed their face and force others to be slaughtered because of their apathy and ignorance. Of course, they are not in the danger of being the civilians being targeted. No, they are on the safety of the couch, the ever-present couch and television combination. So everyone else can be condemned to death, but this is unfortunately the state of America now. The Western powers have no qualms about bombing civilians either, particularly when it's civilians that are disliked by the precious Israelis. This is Bennett again. That will lead them to stop it quickly, and we have an interest in the war being as short as possible. Yeah, they do, because they'll get their ass kicked by Hezbollah, which they have done a couple of times. I haven't said these things publicly up until now, but it's important that we convey the message and prepare to deal with the legal and diplomatic aspects. That is the best way to avoid a war. The reason he hasn't said these things public until now is because it hasn't been time to say these things up until now. Now it's time because they're pre-planning an invasion, an attack, and immense war crimes, and they want to justify it. See, he even says we want to prepare to deal with the legal and diplomatic aspects. In my book, saying that we're going to kill civilians is actually premeditation. But in any book that's applied to the Israelis, I'm sure it will be considered a kneeling warning with upturned eyes and tear-filled eyes, and it'll all be Hezbollah and Lebanon's fault. Again, we're not denying that Hezbollah is an indispensable part of the Lebanese security. Of course it is, and it's Israel's fault that it is, right? It's Israel is constantly aggressing people. Israel's officials claim they're not preparing for war with Lebanon and Hezbollah, but they are, and it's clear. Ayoun's statements are not a threat to Israel. If a tree falls in the forest, it's because it's an anti-Semite and it's a threat to Israel. This is the policies of the Israeli Knesset, right? If Ayoun's statements were really just an open secret, then why would Israel be threatened if Ayoun simply revealed the secret? It's on him, right? He did his own country a disservice if that's a secret and he revealed it. The reason is that Israel sees every other Arab and indigenous ethnicity, including many Jews, in the region as a threat to Israel, right? And it really is threat of expansionism and ethnic cleansing. And Ayoun's statements are nothing new. Neither is the opportunism of the Israelis, I should say, and the fervor with which Israeli officials have pounced upon the statements to pre-justify war and war crimes. That should send a clear signal that Israel is preparing to launch some type of operation against Hezbollah in the future. So that is going to serve as the backdrop for this, and that is the shoot down of the Israeli plane, right? Let's take a look. March 17th, right? We had a week away from these statements about the attack on Hezbollah. We had the Israeli Air Force launching airstrikes in Syria, alleging that the strikes were taken against a weapons convoy of the Lebanese militia coming through Syria. Now, they weren't planning attacking Hezbollah. And then a week later, they bomb Hezbollah. Allegedly. Now let me say, it's allegedly. Remember, Israel's own intelligence agency runs by way of deception. That's their motto. They claim that they were bombing a convoy that was coming to that contained weapons and so forth, that was going to be given to Hezbollah. Now, that could be true. It also could be true that Israel was trying to target some type of weapons depot that the Syrian government military had. It could be that they were targeting civilians. It could be a lot of things. But what we have, 4 Israeli planes took part in the operation, according to the Syrian military. The Syrian military activated anti-aircraft missile defense systems against the Israeli jets, took one down, and hit one more. The jet that was hit crashed in Israeli territory, but by the time the missile hit the plane, it was back over Israeli soil by the time it was able to connect. The Israeli operation and the missile firing were both confirmed by the Syrian and Israeli governments. But Israel would not confirm that a plane had actually been shot down. That's typical of Israel. They don't tend to acknowledge any military defeats or setbacks publicly. Israel claimed that its air defense system, which they call Arrow, was able to intercept one of the missiles, but it wouldn't elaborate. It refused to say whether or not the missiles caused any further damage to Israeli territory. Said the missiles didn't compromise the safety of civilians or compromise any aircraft. Syrian government responded to the Israeli operation, called it blatant aggression. It was. They said it was designed to support terrorist gangs and deflect from the victories of the SAA. It was. Of course, you could scarcely argue with that because Israel's operation, as well as part of his past operations in Syria, they are at blatant aggression. And what's funny is Israel say, no, of course that's ridiculous. We weren't supporting terrorist gangs. Well, you bombed a militia fighting terrorists. What is that but a bombing operation in support of terrorists? Anyway, that's according to their own official story. Some are disputing the Israeli claims that Hezbollah was ever the target to begin with. These sources have argued that the Syrian military and its operations around Palmyra, particularly those centered around removing terrorists from the oil and gas fields, were the real target, and the reason for that would be that those oil and gas fields do provide ISIS with some amount of funding. Now, Arrow is one of Israel's multi-layered missile defense systems. It's designed to intercept long-range ballistic missiles that are located higher in the stratosphere. So that also makes us question, right? If they say they activated Arrow, and it's designed to bring down those types of missiles, why was it activated for an anti-aircraft missile? So a lot of people are questioning the veracity of the Israeli claim regarding the interception of the Syrian missile. Of course, we know that Israel's launched a series of attacks against the Syrian military and Hezbollah inside Syria since the crisis began in 2011. This provided material and medical support to terrorists since the crisis began in earnest. So we know that Israel, of course, is supporting terrorists. But here's another very questionable thing that I want to get into in regards to the geopolitical situation. That is the question of the bombing of the mosque in Jina. Okay, this is definitely something we've got to take a look at, because this made headlines in a place that doesn't always make headlines. Okay, so if the reports are accurate, then the Trump administration is doing all it can to not only continue Obama's war crimes in Syria, but apparently do so in the most visible fashion possible. But if it's not, if the reports are not accurate, we have something going on here that's much deeper. Only a few days after mobilizing U.S. troops in northern Syria near Manbij, what we just talked about, we have the United States allegedly launching airstrikes in Al-Jina under the guise of targeting terrorist organization Ahrar al-Sham, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate. But the reports are suggesting that instead of hitting terrorists, the U.S. simply blew up a mosque and killed around 40 civilians. At the very beginning, the Western media apparently ran headlines claiming that it was the Russians who bombed the mosque. AFP apparently put a story up saying it was the Russians. I found a couple of other websites that still have them up. You could probably search for this, Russia bombs mosque in Syria, and they haven't even taken them down yet. But later, most of those stories came down, and it was reported that it was the United States who was the responsible party. And the Russian headlines were scrubbed, and the news stories published reporting the bombing, as well as the public denials by the U.S. military. So the airstrike took place in Al-Jina, which is in Aleppo province. And the U.S. claims that the bombing was intended for a building nearby that was believed to be hosting an al-Qaeda meeting. U.S. officials had claimed that the intended building is 40 to 50 feet away from the mosque, and even state that the mosque is still standing. Military claims it actually has images that prove the mosque is still standing. Major Josh Jacques, a spokesman for the U.S. Central Command, told BBC, "We did not target nor did we strike a mosque. We targeted an al-Qaeda gathering across the street from a mosque. The mosque does not appear to be damaged following the strike. We are aware of the reports of civilian casualties, and we are looking into it." Okay, so if the military did not destroy the mosque, then they say they have photographic proof that the mosque is still there. Release it. Show us the pictures. That's what we're calling on. I'm going to tell you, before I get to this, before I get to the grand finale, I'm just going to spoiler alert, I'm not convinced the United States bombed the mosque. One of the ways we could know for sure is if the United States has photographic evidence, if they have pictures of the mosque still standing, then release the pictures. Let's see the pictures and put this to rest. We know that the Russians have good satellite photos, right? They've debunked many a propaganda story by the West. So if the Russians have these photos, just release them. Show us the mosque, okay? Here's an interesting part of the story. The U.S. originally said that the bombing took place in Idlib. Then it said it took place in the Aleppo province. And notice also that Ahrar al-Sham is one of the very terrorist organizations the Russians have been bombing in the past, since they got involved in the Syrian conflict, despite being accused of bombing moderate rebels and committing war crimes in the process. Remember, when the Russians bombed Ahrar al-Sham, they claimed they were killing civilians, bombing hospitals. Interestingly enough, now we have the report of the mosque being destroyed came first from, let's look at the sources. Where are the sources showing us that this mosque has been bombed? The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, this one-man band operation based in England, unapologetically pro-terrorist. Who's the other source? It's the White Helmets. The bombing was condemned by them. They posted a video claims to be taken from the mosque. We also have another source. It is Bellingcat. He says he can produce evidence contradicting U.S. military's claims. Remember, his evidence is just carefully crafted propaganda, another pro-terrorist organization. The U.S. military now has confirmed that an airstrike occurred in the area. Again, they say they struck a building 40 to 50 feet away. But what's most interesting about this is was absolutely believable that the U.S. would target a mosque and civilians. Has no qualms about doing that. The corporate mainstream press has tended to hide those allegations in the past by presenting them as Russian attacks or just simply refusing to report on them altogether. And this time the entirety of the media is reporting on the incident. Again, we're not trying to claim that the United States wouldn't do it. They bombed a Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan in 2015. They've regularly bombed civilians in civilian areas in Syria throughout the conflict, as well as oil refineries, grain silos, civilian infrastructure, etc. The entire Syrian conflict is the fault of the United States, and the 400,000 Syrians are dead, and that blood is on the hands of America. So regardless of who or what was bombed in Syria, the fact is the United States is an invader. It is unwelcome. It is unwanted. It is an illegal party to the conflict, and it's clearly the aggressor nation. The fact that it has funded terrorists, that it's armed and directed terrorists for 6 years now, puts the blame for any deaths anywhere in the country related to the conflict or decreased living standards squarely upon the shoulders of the United States. But the fact that the U.S. media, which is typically frothing at the mouth in its anti-Syria stance, is reporting an alleged war crime at such a volume, that's highly interesting. For 6 years, the United States has committed war crimes, atrocities, funded terrorists, bombed civilians and civilian infrastructure, and not one word from the mainstream media, who's done nothing but cover it up and promote it. They've said either the Russians did it, the Syrian government did it, or it didn't happen. They even covered up terrorist atrocities. Now, all of a sudden, the mainstream media is taking this incident, which may or may not have even happened, and making it front page news. There is a reason why that's happening. Not only that, again, look at the sources for the story. It's the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. It's Bellingcat. It's the White Helmets. Again, these are terrorists and terrorist-supporting organizations, which puts them in the company of the State Department, right? They are, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights actually receives funding from a European Union country, which hasn't been revealed yet, but it is an EU country. And the White Helmets receive funding from the U.S. State Department and the UK. So these are essentially Western funded terrorist and terrorist-supporting outlets, propaganda outlets. But why are they condemning the act of the United States? Why are they biting the hand that feeds them? That's another reason to wonder what else is actually boiling down below the surface. So we have all these questions now. Did the U.S. commit an additional war crime in Syria? It's possible. Did that war crime get exposed due to a deep state civil war? Again, 6 years of Obama doing this very thing, nothing is said, and then Trump takes office, and we have this expose. So is this a deep state civil war? It's very possible. Did the U.S. not actually bomb a mosque? I think that's quite possible that they did not bomb the mosque. Or are we just seeing cleverly constructed theater playing out before our eyes, which is what we have seen in the past, right? Where war crimes of a Republican are typically shown on the screen, which horrifies leftist viewers and people who may not support the war, and of course builds up this reputation of the Republican right-wing warmonger and the Democrats, under which we've always had peace, right? Except you haven't had peace under Democrats. That's my point, is that they build up these sort of brand. This is the defense industry's version of branding, right? We have the Republicans who are more direct warfare, more likely to contribute more troops, more overwhelming force, and thus cause more deaths to American military personnel. And the media builds it up as right-wing warmonger, while a Democrat will do the exact same thing, but under left cover. So all these Democrats who are now opposing Trump's alleged war crime here have had no problem with war in Syria for 6 years, right? They've actually gushed and loved the fact that Obama has murdered 400,000 people. They've gushed at the White Helmets. They've gushed at these bearded freak monkeys as some kind of freedom fighter. And to anyone who's listening to the broadcast who 1 year ago wasn't interested in Syria, but today suddenly you're horrified at this war crime, I'm not going to tell you to shut up, because we need all the voices we can get to end the war in Syria. But I will call you a hypocrite, and I'm not going to work with you, because you're not against war. You're not against killing civilians. You are against Republicans killing civilians. And that is despicable. The fact that you would give the lives of hundreds of thousands of people over to a political party says a lot about you. Now, there's more to this situation than meets the eye, though. So are they branding? Is there a deep state civil war? Did the U.S. not do this? Did it do this and just simply get exposed? I don't know, but we're going to be trying to figure it out, and I have an idea that in the coming week to a few months at the most, we will find out, as things start to play out, what has actually happened here in Jina. But there's something under the surface. It is not all what you see, right? So we're going to keep on looking at that. Now, there's also the question of the race for Raqqa. And now our questions of World War III start to pop up yet again. Remember, earlier this year, Trump ordered his military, the Pentagon, to come up with a plan for defeating ISIS. And I think he gave them 30 days or 90 days, or I think maybe, 90 days maybe. The plan is virtually a carbon copy of Obama's plans to start World War III and cause a confrontation with Russia in Syria. The plan involves the deployment of up to 1,000 American soldiers to northern Syria for the purpose of shoring up the offensive to retake Raqqa. And we have, if it's approved by Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, Mad Dog Mattis, and Trump, it would potentially double the number of U.S. forces in Syria, increase the potential for direct U.S. combat involvement in a conflict that has been characterized by confusion and competing priorities among disparate sources. Okay? On the campaign trail, Trump hinted around at the possibility of having a more rational approach to the Syrian crisis and Russian relations. He often accused Hillary Clinton's plan for the region as being dangerous, claimed that it had the potential to start World War III, and he was right, it did. But his new plan looks a lot like Obama's, and a toned-down version of Bloody Hillary's, despite her desire for world incineration. And these claims were contradicted by rhetoric that Obama was weak on Syria. But if he oversaw the murder of 400,000 people and the destruction of a nation and the attempted destruction of a culture, if that's weak, what the hell is your version of strong? So the new deployment is supposed to take place around the time that another new Trump policy, which effectively comes in, eliminating the troop caps that are a holdover from the Obama administration for forces operating in Iraq and Syria. We should also note that Saudi Arabia has said for years that it would be open to contributing troops to Syria as long as the United States would do the same and prove its own commitment to toppling Assad. Turkey has also stated that it is willing to take part in the operation to retake Raqqa, provided the United States ends its support for Kurdish fighters. And now we see that the Syrian military is also closing in on Raqqa, and that's one of the last ISIS strongholds in the country. It's supposed to be expected to be reached rather soon. So we know that the U.S. has been using the presence of ISIS in Syria as an excuse to bomb and send special forces and publicly support terrorists, and possibly even invade fully since the group appeared on the scene 2 years ago. But despite its rhetoric, the U.S. and its coalition has yet to launch a sustained bombing campaign against terrorists in Raqqa. They've largely abstained from bombing any other terrorist group. Instead, the U.S. is focused on bombing Syrian military targets and civilian infrastructure and stuff over the last few years. In the cases where the U.S. has actually bombed terrorists, it seems that it's done so more of an act of death squad herding instead of an attack on actual terrorists. So why the sudden interest in Raqqa? That's fairly simple. The U.S. clearly sees that the Syrian military and Russia are going to liberate Raqqa soon enough, and the U.S. does not want to suffer another public relations setback. A defeat for ISIS is a humiliation for the United States, and that fact alone should raise some eyebrows. The U.S. wants to have its own victory in Raqqa before the Syrians and the Russians can have theirs, And if the SDF is able to take Raqqa, the U.S. is then going to be able to shout out from the rooftops that America has liberated Raqqa and defeated ISIS in its capital. And, of course, there's the question of thieving Syrian territory by using proxy forces of the SDF. Whether or not ISIS proper is in control of Raqqa is kind of a secondary concern for the U.S. If the SDF succeeds in imposing control of the city and the province, then the West is going to have succeeded in cementing control over the area and putting it in the hands of its terrorist proxies again. But it's going to be another incarnation of the same Western-backed jihadist fanaticism with a Kurdish element for the mix. The U.S. can then use the moderate rebel or Kurd label to keep Russia and Syria from bombing the fighters who just assumed a position that was handed to them, even though it was through some level of violence by ISIS. With the situation as it stands now, there's a very real possibility of some type of confrontation taking place in Raqqa that could very well have international ramifications. On one hand, there's the Syrian military backed by the Russian Air Force and Russian special forces, which are heading north and east to Raqqa. Well, on the other side, there's the SDF, which is backed by the U.S. and Air Force and special forces, which is heading south and west toward Raqqa. Both sides are in a race to gain control over Raqqa and gain territory, declare victory. But what if they arrive in Raqqa at the same time? So we have a distinct possibility in the race for Raqqa that the Syrian and Russian alliance might find itself face-to-face with the possibility of a direct military conflict with the U.S. SDF terrorist alliance and the Syrian-Russian alliance on the other hand. So the question then will be who, if anybody, will back down. And if both forces decide to push forward, regardless, the result could be devastating, not just for Syria, but for the rest of the world. And regardless of what happens, you got to remember that the Syrian military is acting entirely in self-defense here against the terrorists and against the rebels and against the United States. Russia, Iran, Hezbollah have all been invited into Syria. They were all acting legally. They all acted with the assent of the Syrian government. And the United States and its coalition are once again acting completely outside of international law in an attempt to shore up its terrorists. And once again, the United States and its coalition of the willing is pushing the patience of the world. Now, we only have just a minute or so left, but again, I want to reiterate, there's a lot of stuff we didn't get to tonight, and we'll try to pick it up next week, but I want to reiterate that there are machinations going on inside the U.S. government, inside the deep state, not just in the United States, but it's taking place across the world now. Machinations that are not known to the general public, not known even to many researchers. There is a lot happening under the surface right now, and it's going to be a rocky ride, I believe, in the future, in the coming future. So it might be time to start making preparations to ride that out. And, of course, we'll probably talk about that more next week as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Brandon Turbeville. This has been Truth on the Tracks. We'll see you next week.
They told us to pack up our bags and head south. They said that the luck of the Irish ran out. They told us they burned down our farms and our stores. They cursed us for cowards and our wives for whores. I wrote it down was out plowing the fields. A group of armed Yankees rolled up on his heels. They never gave him a chance to throw steel. Fired at him till his own body lay still. The cries of our mother rang out through the land as the blood of our brother dried up on the sand. We knew it was time to make our final stand. The wrath of the Irish would soon be at hand. The wrath of the Irish would soon be at hand. We saddled our horses and rode at first light. 6 loaded revolvers, each strapped by our sides.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the host of Anti-Media Radio on UCY.TV.